The scream shattered the quiet street like an alarm. Porch lights flicked on, dogs barked, and neighbors stepped outside to find Karen, our HOA president, covered head to toe, in glitter, gold, pink, and silver shimmered under the street lights as she shouted something about sabotage and community safety. But I knew exactly what had happened. For weeks, she'd been sneaking onto my porch at night, stealing packages that weren't hers, the same ones she'd lectured me about leaving out too long because they ruined the neighborhood aesthetic. Every time I replaced one, another vanished. So I stopped replacing them with regular deliveries. I got creative, because in an HOA like ours, reason doesn't work with people like Karen. They only learn when their lies finally sparkle in the open. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more unbelievable HOA stories like this one. Mornings on Maple Ridge always looked the same. Rows of tidy lawns gleaming under soft sunlight, each porch dressed with planters and little flags fluttering like polite introductions. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked like it had nothing to hide, where the loudest thing you'd hear was a leaf blower or a delivery truck rolling down the street. I liked that predictability. I'd brew my coffee, open the curtains, and see my small world exactly as I left it. Calm, ordinary, safe. But safety, as it turns out, has a way of disappearing quietly. One missing package at a time. The first time it happened, I blamed the delivery company. Maybe they dropped it off at the wrong door. The second time, I told myself it was an honest mix-up. Neighbors sometimes grabbed each other's boxes by accident. But when it kept happening, the calm of Maple Ridge began to feel staged, like a set someone forgot to dust. You start questioning everything. Did I lock the gate last night? Did I really see that box this morning? It's strange how small disruptions can make you feel exposed in your own home. Then came the realization that every perfect street has a self-appointed guardian. Ours was Karen Whitmore, the woman who measured grass height with a ruler and quoted HOA bylaws like scripture. She was always around, always watching, her clipboard clutched like a badge. At first, I thought she was just passionate about keeping things orderly. But passion and obsession have a thin border, and she liked to patrol it daily. I started noticing little things, her lingering glances at my porch, her remarks about cluttered deliveries and uncollected packages. That's when the pattern clicked. The disappearing boxes, the unsolicited advice, the perfectly timed visits. It was all too convenient. And once the suspicion took root, peace was no longer enough. I wanted the truth. People say revenge begins with anger, but it really begins with curiosity, the quiet kind that keeps you awake at night. I wasn't angry yet, just intrigued. Who steals from their own neighbor and smiles about it? I didn't know what I'd do next, but one thing was certain. If someone was taking my packages, they were about to receive one they'd never forget. When I first moved to Maple Ridge, I thought I had found the perfect compromise between solitude and belonging. The kind of place where you could borrow a ladder, wave at your neighbors, and still retreat behind a fence when you'd had enough small talk for one lifetime. My days revolved around simple rituals: coffee before sunrise, freelance work that rarely demanded pants with buttons, and evenings spent fixing up my small garden while podcasts whispered in the background. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Predictable, peaceful, quiet. Until Karen arrived. Karen Whitmore moved into the cul-de-sac like she'd been sent by a higher power to remind everyone that order must come before joy. You could hear her before you saw her. Sharp heels clicking on pavement, the rhythmic percussion of purpose. She was in her mid-50s, always dressed like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. Tailored blazer, pearl earrings, hair so stiff it could have been sculpted by architecture. In one hand, she carried a clipboard that seemed surgically attached. In the other, a phone, always ready to capture evidence. The neighborhood called her Madam President, long before she actually became one. Her rise to HOA power was inevitable. She volunteered for everything, from the community potluck to the parking policy committee, and her speeches, God, her speeches, were legendary. "We are not just a neighborhood," she'd say. "We are a reflection of standards." And people believed her. Maybe it was the confidence, or maybe it was fear. Either way, she won the presidency by a landslide, running unopposed. No one dared to stand in her way. Some joked she didn't win the election. She simply declared it. At first, I tried to play along. I showed up at meetings, paid my dues on time, even helped repaint the communal mailbox posts. But it didn't take long to see how her version of community was really about control. She issued warnings like parking tickets, grass an inch too tall, violation notice, trash can visible from the street. Fine. Christmas lights still up on January 3rd? Expect a letter. It wasn't governance. It was theater. And Karen loved being the star. I remember one afternoon when I was sanding an old bench in my backyard, lost in thought. Karen appeared at my gate, clipboard in hand, and said with a tight smile, "You know, wood dust attracts termites. You wouldn't want to cause an infestation." I told her I'd be careful, but she didn't move. She adjusted her sunglasses, looked around like a detective searching for motive, and said, "Just keeping the neighborhood safe." Then she walked away, heels punctuating each syllable of her self-importance. I laughed at first. But that's the thing about people like Karen. What starts as funny becomes exhausting. You learn quickly that control isn't about what people tell you to do. It's about how they make you feel when you resist. Every warning came with a hint of judgment, a subtle reminder that peace in this neighborhood depended on her approval. And the strange part? Most people complied. She had turned politeness into a weapon, the kind of smile that hides a knife. My life, though, was built around boundaries. I worked from home, and that meant the small world behind my fence was sacred. I valued my space, my freedom to make things a little messy, to leave tools out when I was mid-project, to receive packages without an audience. Those deliveries were small joys, a sign that life outside the fence still remembered me. Tools, books, the occasional impulse buy that made no sense but felt necessary. And every time a package arrived, it was like a little reminder that life still had surprises worth waiting for. But Karen didn't believe in surprises. She believed in systems. And in her system, even something as innocent as a stack of boxes became an eyesore. She'd mention it casually during her patrols. "You should really bring those in sooner. It ruins the aesthetic." She said aesthetic, like it was a law of nature. Once, when I got home late and found a delivery left overnight, I noticed the box was moved a few inches closer to my door. At the time, I thought it was kindness, someone keeping it safe. But looking back, I realized she was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could go unnoticed. People like Karen don't just cross lines. They redraw them. They frame their interference as care, their intrusion as leadership. And if you're not paying attention, you start adjusting to it. You start thinking maybe they're right. Maybe your grass is too long. Maybe your fence paint is fading. Maybe your packages really do ruin the view. It's a slow erosion of self-trust, and she was an expert at it. But something in me resisted. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the quiet rebellion of someone who's had enough of being told how to live. I didn't hate her then. I just didn't understand why keeping order made her so happy. I couldn't see yet that her obsession wasn't about perfection, it was about control. Control is a hunger that never fills, and soon she would cross the line from controlling the neighborhood to taking what didn't belong to her. The irony, of course, is that her downfall would begin with something small, something she thought she deserved. A brown cardboard box sitting quietly on my porch, minding its own business. The very thing she wanted to regulate would be the thing that revealed her. And maybe that's the poetic symmetry of it all. People who spend their lives enforcing rules always forget that karma doesn't need permission to deliver. It started small, like most annoyances do, a missing book I'd ordered. Nothing expensive, just something I was looking forward to reading. I blamed the courier, left a polite message with customer service, and moved on. But when the second package vanished, I felt that tiny flicker of irritation that tells you something isn't right. You know that feeling when a pattern begins to form, but you're not ready to admit it yet? That was me, standing on my porch, looking at the same empty spot where a box should have been, convincing myself it was coincidence, because the alternative, the idea that someone was watching my house, felt a little too personal. The third time, it wasn't denial, it was disbelief. The missing item was a small toolkit, the kind you don't just misplace. I checked the delivery photo. There it was, time-stamped, sitting neatly by my door. And yet, hours later, gone, I replayed the mental footage. I was home that day, I'd gone outside twice, and somehow it still vanished. It wasn't about the money, it was the principle. Every stolen package felt like someone had trespassed through the invisible boundary of trust that makes a neighborhood feel like home. I started asking questions, casual ones at first. Hey, have you noticed any missing deliveries lately? Most neighbors hadn't, though a few mentioned odd occurrences. Packages moved, opened, or left halfway down their driveways. One even said her doorbell camera caught a shadowy figure passing by late at night. But no one wanted to make a big deal out of it. Small towns love harmony more than honesty, and in Maple Ridge, calling out bad behavior was like breaking a social contract. People preferred to whisper about problems, not solve them. Still, I couldn't let it go. I went through my emails, checked tracking updates, compared timestamps. That's when I noticed a pattern. Deliveries that disappeared were always on the same 2 days each week, and always before 9 p.m. It was almost methodical. Whoever was taking them wasn't random. They had a rhythm, a thief with a schedule. That realization shifted something in me. This wasn't just a petty annoyance anymore. It was a challenge. I bought a cheap motion sensor light and screwed it just above my front steps. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like I was doing something. The first night, nothing happened. The second, same thing. On the third, I came out in the morning and saw something that stopped me mid-step. A faint smear of glittery residue on the railing. It looked like the shimmer from a cosmetic powder, something you'd see on a scarf or sleeve. It seemed meaningless, but I remembered Karen's oversized tote bag, the one she carried everywhere, covered in flecks of the same metallic shine. A coincidence, maybe, but curiosity started replacing frustration. I decided to check the street camera at the corner. Technically city property, but footage could be requested. It took a few days, but when I finally got the stills, I saw the silhouette of a person walking up my driveway. Female, medium height, coat belted tight, hair pulled back. The photo wasn't perfect, but the posture was familiar. Straight spine, chin lifted, steps too deliberate to belong to a teenager out for mischief. And then I saw it. Heels. Who the hell steals packages in heels? That was the moment the pieces locked in. The missing deliveries, the glitter, the posture. It wasn't some stranger driving through the neighborhood. It was someone who already felt entitled to control it. Someone who thought they were maintaining order, not breaking it. The image of Karen flashed in my mind, clipboard in one hand, HOA letter in the other, lecturing me about porch clutter, while her own conscience collected dust. But even then, I didn't want to believe it. The human brain clings to logic, even when the truth is obvious. I told myself I needed proof, something undeniable. So I set up a discreet camera above my porch light, angled perfectly toward the steps. Every night before bed, I checked that it was recording. Every morning, I checked that the red light still blinked. And beneath all that preparation was one question looping in my mind. What kind of person steals from their neighbor, smiles to their face, and still sleeps soundly at night? That's when irritation transformed into resolve. I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not until I had evidence that left no room for her theatrics or excuses. Because if Karen was the thief, she wasn't just taking my packages. She was taking advantage of everyone's silence. And someone needed to remind her that even in Maple Ridge, karma doesn't need an HOA's approval to deliver. There's a difference between suspicion and certainty. Suspicion keeps you awake at night, watching shadows. Certainty lets you sleep because you know what needs to be done. By the time I saw that grainy still frame, the shape of a woman in heels, head tilted with entitlement, I knew I wasn't imagining things anymore. Someone was walking up to my porch and taking what didn't belong to them, and if I was right about who it was, this wasn't theft out of need. It was theft out of ego. That's what made it worse. So I decided to do what any rational person with a little too much free time and a sense of humor would do. I began planning Operation Sparkle. My first step was simple: document everything. I set up a legitimate camera under the eaves of my porch, one of those models designed for homeowners who like their privacy intact, but their proof undeniable. I wasn't about to play detective in the dark. The camera connected to a cloud server, time-stamped every clip, and gave me notifications whenever motion was detected. Legal, clear, unambiguous, the kind of evidence that speaks for itself. I double-checked placement. Enough to catch the culprit. Not enough to invade anyone's privacy. It's funny how quickly you become meticulous when you're building a case, not just collecting proof. Each day, I logged deliveries and tracked what disappeared. I even synced timestamps between the delivery app and my footage. Within a week, the rhythm emerged again. Every other night, same time frame, just after sunset. Predictable, calculated. And that predictability gave me the leverage I needed. The question wasn't if she'd strike again, but how to make her wish she hadn't. Now, let me be clear. Revenge wasn't my intention. Revenge burns both sides. What I wanted was exposure. A mirror held up so that the thief could see themselves as everyone else did. That's when the idea of glitter came to me. I can't even remember where I first heard of glitter traps. Maybe a news clip, maybe a viral prank. But the thought of it stuck. Glitter is poetic justice in its purest form. Harmless, yet impossible to ignore. You can't wash it off. You can't hide it. It clings to everything, like karma with a sense of humor. I wanted this trap to feel like a lesson, not a threat. So I started with research. I looked into local regulations, making sure that booby-trapping property wasn't crossing into illegal territory. The key was intent. My goal was deterrence, not harm. The package itself would contain no toxins, no alarms, no damage. Just a small device that would burst open a cloud of glitter the moment the lid was lifted. Messy, not malicious. And yes, it would be spectacular. The setup took longer than I'd expected. I found a medium-sized cardboard box, plain and ordinary, the kind that practically screams, Amazon impulse buy. Inside, I placed a small spring mechanism, something I'd built using a reusable confetti launcher and a battery trigger. When the lid opened, it would release a fine burst of glitter, mixed with biodegradable confetti. I even tested it in my workshop, laughing when the entire room shimmered for days. Glitter, once unleashed, refuses to be forgotten. It was the perfect metaphor for what was coming. Visible truth that sticks. I printed a fake shipping label with a believable sender. Something mundane like Home Supply Depot. I even sealed it with clear tape to make it look recently delivered. It sat on my porch, innocent as could be, while my camera watched silently from above. The plan was simple. Bait, wait, and watch. But underneath that simplicity was an ocean of tension. Because when you know someone is watching you, every sound feels like a signal. Every movement like a countdown. The first night? Nothing. The second? A flicker of motion at the far end of the street. But it turned out to be a dog walker. On the third night, I started doubting myself. Maybe she'd stopped. Maybe she sensed something. Or maybe she just hadn't seen the box yet. There's a strange psychology to waiting for someone to betray themselves. You almost start empathizing with their temptation. The difference between justice and obsession can get blurry when you're standing in your own driveway, staring into darkness. But then, just after midnight, the motion alert pinged. My phone lit up, and there she was. Beige coat, hair tied up, heels clicking softly against the pavement. Karen, clipboard replaced by a large tote bag. She moved like someone who believed the world owed her whatever she wanted. I watched as she looked both ways, stepped onto my porch, and crouched over the package. My breath caught. She lifted the box, hesitated for half a second, then popped the lid. A flash of color erupted, pink, gold, silver, green, an explosion of sparkle against the night. She flinched, dropped the box, and stumbled back, waving her hands like she'd been ambushed by a unicorn. Glitter coated her coat, her scarf, her hair, clinging to every surface like tiny witnesses refusing to be silenced. The camera caught it all. The shock, the panic, the disbelief. She glanced around, trying to compose herself, then hurried down the street, leaving a faint trail of shimmer under the porch light. In that moment, I didn't cheer, I didn't gloat, I just exhaled. Because this wasn't about humiliation, it was about truth finally revealing itself. The glitter wasn't punishment, it was evidence, proof that beneath the perfect image she tried to uphold, there was a streak of dishonesty she couldn't polish away. After she disappeared around the corner, I rewound the footage, watching the sequence over and over. Not out of spite, but satisfaction. Every second was time-stamped, clear, undeniable. And the irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd spent years enforcing rules had just broken the most basic one: respect your neighbor's property. That night, as I cleaned the porch, I thought about how justice sometimes wears strange disguises. Sometimes it's not the law or confrontation that restores balance. Sometimes it's a cloud of glitter, a harmless burst of light reminding everyone that what's done in the dark will eventually sparkle in the open. And as the street settled back into silence, I smiled, knowing this wasn't the end of the story. The real revelation was yet to come, and I had all the proof I needed to make it shine. The night it happened felt like any other. Quiet, still, harmless. The kind of silence that tricks you into thinking nothing ever changes in your neighborhood. Streetlights hummed faintly, washing the sidewalk in tired orange, and somewhere a sprinkler clicked on in predictable rhythm. But under that calm veneer, there was tension. I'd placed the package earlier that evening, perfectly ordinary on the surface, labeled and sealed with the practiced care of a habitual online shopper. My camera was already running, the battery charged, the lens angled to catch everything. And even though I told myself this was about justice, not revenge, I could feel my heart racing faster than I wanted to admit. It's strange. When you're about to expose someone's truth, you start questioning your own. I sat by the window, half hidden behind the curtains, pretending to read but really watching the soft glow of my porch light. Nothing moved for hours. Every sound outside felt amplified. The distant bark of a dog, the rustle of wind through hedges, the hum of a passing car. Midnight came and went. My coffee turned cold. I began to wonder if she'd backed off, if maybe word had gotten out that I was done being passive. But Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly. She thrived on control, and people like that never know when to stop. At 12:27 a.m., my phone buzzed. The motion alert. A familiar rush of adrenaline kicked in. I opened the live feed, and there she was. Right on schedule. Beige trench coat, same heels, the same self-assured gait that made her look more like a detective than a thief. She paused at the end of my walkway, scanning the street like she owned it. Her breath made faint clouds in the cool air, and I swear you could see the calculation in her eyes. She didn't see a crime. She saw an opportunity. Karen stepped forward slowly, the click of her heels muffled by the welcome mat. Her posture was rigid, shoulders pulled back, as though good posture could make theft respectable. She bent over the box, hesitated, and glanced around. For a moment, she seemed almost human, nervous, cautious. But then her lips curved into that familiar smirk, the kind she wore at HOA meetings when issuing fines. And she reached down. Her fingers slid under the flap of the cardboard lid. The sound was small but satisfying, the crisp tear of tape giving way, a sound I'd been waiting to hear. And then it happened. A sharp pop, followed by a shimmering explosion of color. Gold, pink, silver, blue, tiny specks of light erupted into the night, catching in her hair, her scarf, her open mouth as she gasped. The porch camera captured it all in perfect clarity. For half a second, she froze, hands mid-air, face frozen in disbelief. Then came the shriek, not fear, not pain, just pure, stunned indignation. She staggered backward, brushing frantically at her coat, only to make it worse. Every motion spread the glitter further. It clung to her like guilt. Every flick of her hand made her shine brighter. The more she fought it, the more obvious it became. It was poetic in its simplicity. The thief illuminated by her own crime. I could hear faint audio from the mic I'd hidden near the porch light. "What the? What is this?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp. "He did this on purpose. He'll regret this." She scooped the ruined box up, looked around once more, and bolted toward the end of the street. The tote bag swung wildly at her side, leaving a faint trail of sparkle in her wake. If irony had a sound, it would have been that rhythmic click of heels retreating into the dark. For a moment, I just sat there, stunned. Months of suspicion, frustration, and restraint had culminated in 30 seconds of messy, glittering justice. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm, calmer than I'd been in weeks, because there it was, undeniable and time-stamped. Proof. The woman who preached order and responsibility had just stolen from the neighbor she lectured about community values. The same neighbor who'd spent months giving her the benefit of the doubt. When I replayed the footage, I couldn't help smiling, not out of malice, but satisfaction. The way the glitter burst outward, the way she froze, the way her dignity crumbled in slow motion. It was art, not cruel, not dangerous, just revealing. Glitter is the great equalizer. It doesn't care about power or reputation. It marks everyone the same. Watching her panic under that shimmer was the closest thing I've ever seen to poetic justice. But beneath the humor was something deeper. The footage showed what authority looks like when it forgets empathy. The image of Karen, our self-proclaimed guardian of order, covered head to toe in evidence of her own wrongdoing, felt symbolic. It wasn't about glitter anymore. It was about exposure. You can't enforce decency when you've lost your own. You can't claim leadership while stealing under the cover of darkness. I saved the footage twice, once on the cloud, once on a separate drive. I labeled it Porch Delivery, Exhibit A. There was a certain power in naming it, like closing a chapter before it had a chance to reopen. And yet, even as I sat there watching the replay, I felt a strange mix of pride and pity. Pride that I'd stood my ground, but pity for someone who'd let control consume her so completely that humiliation became inevitable. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering the leftover glitter across my porch. Under the light, it looked almost beautiful, like the remnants of a celebration no one intended to have. Maybe, in a way, it was one. A quiet celebration of boundaries restored, of truth uncovered without cruelty. As the neighborhood slept, I closed my curtains, finally at peace with the knowledge that justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it shimmered softly in the dark, catching the light just long enough for everyone to see. The next morning, Maple Ridge woke up buzzing. Word travels fast in small neighborhoods, and nothing moves faster than gossip about glitter and scandal. I hadn't told anyone yet, but rumors have a way of writing themselves when the evidence literally sparkles. Karen's car, her mailbox, even her front walkway. Everything glimmered faintly in the sunlight, a trail she couldn't sweep away. I imagine she spent hours scrubbing, trying to erase what she'd done. But glitter, much like truth, doesn't disappear just because you want it to. It lingers. It shines through denial. By noon, I got an email from the HOA board. Urgent. Discussion required regarding recent disturbance. The irony was almost comical. Karen, the enforcer of rules, now trying to control the narrative she'd created. I opened the message expecting drama, and I wasn't disappointed. It was formal yet frantic, full of vague accusations about unauthorized surveillance and potential safety hazards. She was attempting to flip the story before it escaped her grasp. That's what control does. It panics when cornered. I responded simply, happy to discuss. I have relevant footage and documentation. That line was my calm counterpunch, because the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen. And soon, it would be. The meeting took place that evening in the community center, a beige room with coffee-stained tables and a faint smell of desperation. Nearly the entire neighborhood showed up, faces tight with curiosity and concealed amusement. Everyone had heard something, but no one knew the full story. Karen sat at the head of the table, hair still flecked with the tiniest hint of gold. She looked smaller than usual, though she tried to mask it with posture and lipstick. Her voice, when she spoke, was brittle. "Residents," she began, "it has come to my attention that one of our members has installed unauthorized surveillance equipment directed toward public property, violating Section 8 of the HOA Code." Her eyes flicked to me like daggers wrapped in politeness. "This is a serious privacy issue, and I believe it poses a risk to community harmony." The silence that followed was the kind that hums with anticipation. I stood, keeping my voice measured. "Actually, Karen, the cameras face my porch, my property, installed legally and documented. And what they captured," I paused, letting curiosity swell, "is the real issue here." I lifted my phone, projecting the footage onto the wall. The first frame appeared, Karen, illuminated by my porch light, crouching to lift the box. Her face was unmistakable. The room gasped collectively as the glitter explosion erupted across the screen, filling the room with stifled laughter and disbelief. It wasn't cruel laughter. It was the sound of tension breaking after months of quiet resentment. Watching her caught red-handed felt like exhaling after holding your breath too long. Karen's reaction was immediate. "That's taken out of context," she barked. "He set me up. This was entrapment. You can't." I raised my hand slightly, cutting through her noise. "No one forced you to trespass, Karen. You did that on your own. You even said, and I quote, 'He won't miss it. It's for the community anyway.'" The audio clip played, her own voice betraying her authority. The color drained from her face, replaced by the hollow expression of someone realizing the stage she built had just collapsed beneath her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mrs. Beasley, the treasurer, cleared her throat. "Karen," she said gently, "we've supported you for years, but this isn't leadership. This is theft." Around the room, heads nodded. Even Wilson, the vice president and retired attorney who rarely spoke, leaned forward. "We can't enforce laws selectively," he added. "We either hold everyone accountable or we have no integrity at all." Karen's composure cracked. "After all I've done for this neighborhood? You're all going to turn on me because of one mistake?" Her voice rose, shrill with disbelief. "You people are ungrateful. I've kept this place in order. I've kept it safe." That's the thing about control. It always mistakes fear for respect. She wasn't used to being challenged. She wasn't used to mirrors that reflected back what she didn't want to see. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, then said quietly, "Order doesn't come from fear, Karen. It comes from trust. And that's something you've broken." The board moved swiftly after that. Wilson called for a vote. An emergency motion to remove Karen as president for conduct unbecoming of her position. Hands went up across the room, one after another, until only hers remained lowered. When the motion passed, there was no applause, just a collective sigh of relief. Years of silent frustration evaporated in that breath. Karen stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. "You'll regret this," she spat, her voice trembling. "This whole place will fall apart without me." She stormed out, glitter still catching the fluorescent light as she left. For a long time after the door closed, no one moved. Then, as if by instinct, people began talking about new ideas, fairer policies, maybe even an end to the endless fines. It was like watching a town wake up from a bad dream. When the meeting adjourned, several neighbors approached me. Some shook my hand, others simply smiled, their eyes saying what words didn't need to. Gratitude, relief, validation, not because I'd humiliated her, but because I'd proven that fairness could exist, even in a place that had forgotten what it looked like. Walking home that night, the air felt lighter, the streetlights seemed brighter, maybe because they no longer shone on pretense. In front of Karen's house, I noticed something small, a single speck of glitter clinging to her mailbox, catching the light like a tiny badge of irony. And I realized then that truth, once exposed, doesn't vanish. It glimmers quietly, a reminder that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sparkles, waiting patiently for the light to find it again. The morning after the meeting felt different. The air was still cool, the street unusually quiet, and for the first time in months, my porch looked exactly the way it should. Ordinary, untouched, peaceful. I stood there with my coffee, watching the delivery truck make its rounds. When the driver waved and dropped off a small box by my door, I felt an almost silly wave of relief. It wasn't about the package itself. It was about trust. The simple act of knowing something could be left in front of my home and still be there when I came back. That's what order is supposed to mean. Not control, but peace. Karen didn't show her face for a while after that night. Her house, once the stage for every HOA announcement, went dark. The clipboard disappeared. The rule memos stopped. You could feel the neighborhood exhale, like everyone had been holding their breath without realizing it. Funny how one person's absence can make everything sound quieter, like removing static from a radio signal. But absence doesn't erase consequence. The board, newly restructured under Wilson's calm guidance, sent out a letter to all residents, transparent, factual, polite. It explained what had happened, what measures would be taken, and how leadership would now focus on rebuilding trust instead of enforcing fear. There were no names mentioned, but everyone knew. It wasn't about shaming her, it was about resetting the moral compass, because when power hides behind policy, truth has to come knocking. And in this case, it didn't knock. It glittered. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to started waving when I passed. Some stopped to talk, sharing their own stories, small frustrations they'd been too polite to voice before. "She once fined me for painting my shutters the wrong shade of blue," one said, shaking his head. "Turns out, maybe I should have used glitter instead." We laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of shared release. It's strange how collective relief can bond people faster than friendship ever could. A week later, Karen reappeared, her energy dimmed but not gone. I saw her early one morning, standing by her car with a "for sale" sign staked into her front lawn. The image was surreal. This woman, who had dictated the shade of everyone's mailbox, now surrendering her own domain. She didn't look at me, but she didn't have to. Some defeats are too complete for eye contact. I didn't feel vindicated, just finished. Closure. Real closure. Doesn't taste like victory. It tastes like quiet. Still, there was one last conversation waiting. About a month later, when her house was half-packed and her moving truck idled at the curb, she came over. Her voice was different, quieter, stripped of the courtroom tone she used to wear like armor. "I wasn't trying to be cruel," she said. "I just wanted things to be right." I could hear the exhaustion under it, the part of her that genuinely believed she'd been protecting something fragile. I told her, "There's a difference between right and rigid, Karen. One keeps things balanced, the other breaks them." She looked down, maybe to hide tears, maybe just to avoid reflection. "You made me the joke of this town," she murmured. I shook my head. "No, you did that. I just gave everyone a mirror." She nodded once, a gesture halfway between resignation and understanding, then walked away. That was the last time I saw her. When she finally moved, the neighborhood gathered. Some out of curiosity, others out of closure. Watching her car pull away, a few people even clapped. Not out of cruelty, but gratitude. For the first time, Maple Ridge felt like a community again. Not perfect, not rule-bound, just human. The new HOA meetings became shorter, lighter, almost social. People started talking about community gardens, block parties, shared fences instead of fines. The tone shifted from enforcement to engagement. And maybe that was the real victory. One afternoon, I found a handwritten note in my mailbox. It was unsigned, but I knew who it was from. The handwriting was meticulous, the kind of careful penmanship you develop from years of writing official letters. It said, "Sometimes I forget that control is a kind of fear. I hope you never do." It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was enough. maybe even better than one. Life in Maple Ridge eventually settled back into its gentle rhythm. Packages came and went, kids rode bikes down the street, and the HOA newsletter started featuring recipes instead of regulations. Every now and then, a fleck of glitter would catch my eye. On the porch rail, in the garden soil, embedded in the welcome mat. Tiny reminders of a lesson learned the hard way. Respect isn't enforced, it's earned. And that's what the whole ordeal taught me. Balance matters. Boundaries matter. But more than anything, people matter. We can build fences, write rules, hold meetings, but without empathy, even the nicest neighborhoods become prisons with pretty lawns. The goal isn't to control the community, it's to belong to it. As for me, I still enjoy those quiet mornings. Coffee, sunlight, the hum of distant sprinklers, and a small box resting safely by the door. No drama, no fear, just the simple joy of trust restored. And maybe that's the best kind of ending. Not explosive, not dramatic, just peaceful. Because in the end, it's not about glitter or revenge or even justice. It's about what stays after the dust, or in this case, the sparkle, settles. A little shine, a little grace, and the reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of truth make the brightest marks. And that's how one glitter-covered lesson brought peace back to Maple Ridge. You know, it's funny. Karen thought she was keeping the neighborhood in order, but in the end, she just proved that control without respect always collapses. Sometimes karma doesn't need to shout, it just shines a little brighter than pride. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more tales just like this. Drop a comment down below and tell me, what's the craziest HOA or neighbor story you've ever heard? I might just feature your reply in a future video. And of course, subscribe if you haven't already, because there are plenty more wild, true, and sometimes sparkly stories coming your way. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always finds a way to glitter.